How to overcome these thoughts? Not the events, not the people, not the world outside. The thoughts. The ones that replay the conversation long after it ended. The ones that imagine disasters that have not happened. The ones that turn a small irritation into sustained anger. The ones that create anxiety in a quiet room where nothing is actually wrong. You know this experience. You leave a meeting and replay every sentence in your head. You lie in bed and construct worst-case futures with remarkable detail. You feel anger hours after the moment has passed. Nothing catastrophic occurred. No real threat is present. And yet internally, there is tension, restlessness, pressure. It feels as if your own mind has become the loudest voice in the room. The disturbing part is not that fear, anger, or anxiety appear. They are human. The disturbing part is how quickly you believe what your mind presents. A thought arises, and before you examine it, you accept it. An interpretation forms, and before you question it, you react to it. You do not just experience the thought, you endorse it, and once endorsed, it begins to rule you. What if the problem is not what happens to you, but what your mind keeps repeating after it happens? What if the suffering is not created by the event itself, but by the story layered on top of it? A comment becomes disrespect. A delay becomes disaster. A possibility becomes certainty. And slowly, without noticing, you start living inside interpretations rather than reality. The Stoics understood something that still feels radical today. You are not disturbed by events, but by your judgments about them. That means the battlefield is not outside. It is between the impression that appears and the agreement you give to it. Fear is often an imagined future treated as fact. Anger is often an expectation treated as law. Anxiety is often an outcome treated as if it were already decided. This does not mean your emotions are illusions. It means they are responses to what you believe is happening. And beliefs can be examined. They can be slowed down. They can be separated from automatic reaction. The mind produces impressions quickly, but your agreement with them is voluntary. Over the next reflections, you will not be asked to silence your thoughts or suppress your emotions. You will learn to see them before you submit to them, to recognize when the narration continues long after the event is over, to separate fact from interpretation, to focus on what is within your control and release what is not. And in doing so, something subtle but powerful begins to change. You will not eliminate fear. You will reduce its authority. You will not erase anger. You will weaken its command. You will not prevent anxiety from appearing. You will stop letting it decide your behavior. The world may remain uncertain, but your relationship with your own mind can become steadier. Everything begins with one realization that most people never question. The thought that appears in your mind is not automatically the truth. Thoughts are not facts. The first liberation does not come from controlling the world. It comes from questioning the automatic authority of your own thoughts. A thought appears in your mind and you treat it as information. Worse, you treat it as reality. They disrespected me. This is going to fail. Something bad is about to happen. The sentence forms internally, and before you examine it, your body reacts. Your heart rate changes, your mood shifts, your posture tightens. All because a mental sentence was accepted without inspection. The mind is a generator. It produces interpretations constantly. It predicts, assumes, exaggerates, remembers selectively, and fills in gaps with imagination. This function is not a flaw. It is part of survival. But survival thinking is not always accurate thinking. A possibility is not a certainty. An assumption is not a fact. A prediction is not an outcome. Yet most people live as if every thought deserves agreement. Pause and examine this carefully. When did you decide that every internal sentence is trustworthy? When did you accept that because you think something, it must be true? If a stranger told you half of what your mind tells you on a stressful day, you would question it. But when the voice is internal, you rarely do. The Stoics made a crucial distinction. An impression arrives automatically. Your assent to that impression is voluntary. The first reaction may be quick. The endorsement is a choice. Between stimulus and response, there is a narrow space. In that space, reason can intervene. Imagine the difference between these two positions. In the first, you are fused with your thoughts. You think, "I will fail," and immediately feel fear. In the second, you observe, "The thought that I will fail is present." The content is the same. The relationship is different. Observation replaces identification. When you begin to treat thoughts as mental events rather than facts, emotional intensity changes. Not instantly, not magically, but measurably, because emotion follows interpretation. If the interpretation is examined, the emotion is softened. If the interpretation is blindly accepted, the emotion is amplified. This is the real battlefield. Not outside circumstances, but the moment you decide whether a thought deserves authority. You do not control which thoughts arise. You control which ones you empower. And once you see that thoughts are not facts, another realization becomes unavoidable. Many of the emotions you experience long after an event has ended are not caused by the event itself. They are sustained by something else, something that continues even when reality has moved on. The emotional echo effect. An event happens, a comment is made, a mistake occurs, a possibility is imagined. The moment passes, but inside you, it continues. Hours later, you are still replaying the conversation, still constructing alternative responses, still imagining what they meant, still feeling irritation, still feeling fear. The external stimulus ended quickly. The internal narration did not. This is the emotional echo effect. Fear, anger, and anxiety are often not sustained by reality. They are sustained by repetition. The mind revisits the scene, reconstructs it, exaggerates it, and rehearses it. Each replay is treated as a new experience. Your body responds again. Your emotions flare again. You are not reacting to the world anymore. You are reacting to your own mental replay. This is why you suffer twice. Once when the event occurs. Again when you continue narrating it. The Stoics understood that impressions are immediate, but disturbance is extended by judgment. The initial irritation may be unavoidable. The continuation of that irritation is optional. Not easy to stop, but optional. Observe the mechanism carefully. Something small happens. The mind adds interpretation. The interpretation triggers emotion. The emotion fuels more interpretation. A loop begins. And because the loop feels vivid, you mistake it for ongoing danger. But nothing new is happening. The world has moved on. The echo remains. This is especially visible in anxiety. You imagine a future outcome. The body reacts as if it is happening now. The imagination continues constructing scenarios. The body continues responding. No threat is present, yet the nervous system behaves as if one is. Anger follows the same structure. You replay the disrespect. You rehearse what you should have said. You build arguments in silence. The original event lasted seconds. The internal echo lasts hours. When you recognize the echo effect, something shifts. You realize the emotion is not entirely anchored in the present. It is anchored in repetition. And repetition requires participation. You cannot prevent the first impression. You can reduce the second and third. You can interrupt the loop. But to do that, you must see the layer your mind adds on top of reality. Because what you are reacting to is often not the event, but the story you built around it. The story, layer on top of the event. Every event is simple. Something was said. Something was delayed. Something did not go as planned. The facts are usually brief and neutral. But the mind rarely leaves them in that state. It adds a story. A colleague does not respond to your message. The fact is silence. The story becomes rejection, disrespect, dismissal. A plan changes unexpectedly. The fact is alteration. The story becomes failure, unfairness, catastrophe. The event is small. The narrative is large. This story layer is where emotional escalation begins. The Stoics insisted on separating what happens from what you say about what happens. They understood that disturbance grows not from the raw event, but from interpretation. When you merge the two, you create intensity where none originally existed. Examine a recent situation that caused you anxiety or anger. If you strip it down to bare facts, what remains? Usually something far less dramatic than the emotion suggested. The added meaning amplified the reaction, and that added meaning came from you. This is not self-blame. It is self-empowerment. If interpretation intensifies emotion, interpretation can also moderate it. The mind is fast. It attaches conclusions instantly. They meant to insult me. This will ruin everything. I cannot handle this. But these are not facts. They are assumptions layered onto neutral events. When you learn to pause and separate the event from the narrative, emotional intensity decreases. Not because you deny what happened, but because you refuse to exaggerate it. This separation is the beginning of clarity. It allows you to see where your suffering is being constructed. And once you see construction, you can choose not to keep building. But even when you understand the difference between event and story, anxiety often persists for another reason. It is not just about interpretation. It is about control. Or more precisely, the illusion that you should be able to control what was never yours to command. The illusion of control. Much of your anxiety is not born from what is happening, but from the belief that you should be able to control what is happening. You replay scenarios in your mind, trying to predict outcomes. You rehearse conversations in advance, attempting to manage every possible response. You mentally prepare for disasters that have not occurred, as if anticipation alone could prevent them. But there is a hidden exhaustion in this habit. You are attempting to control variables that were never within your reach: the timing of events, the reactions of others, the decisions of people you do not command, the future unfolding of circumstances beyond your influence. And because you cannot secure them, your mind remains restless. The Stoic distinction between what is within your control and what is not abstract philosophy. It is psychological relief. When you try to control the uncontrollable, you generate tension. When you redirect your attention to what truly depends on you, that tension decreases. What depends on you is smaller than you think: your judgments, your effort, your words, your actions in the present moment. That is the territory of authority. Everything else is outcome, probability, chance. Anxiety grows in the gap between expectation and reality. You expect certainty. Reality offers uncertainty. You expect guarantees. Reality offers possibility. The mind tries to close that gap by rehearsing, predicting, controlling. But rehearsal does not grant power. It only multiplies mental noise. When you accept that certain outcomes are not yours to command, you stop fighting imaginary battles. You conserve energy. You release yourself from the burden of omnipotence. This does not make you passive. It makes you precise. You act where you can act. You prepare where preparation is possible. You let go where control is impossible. And in that letting go, something quiet happens. Anxiety loses oxygen. But even with this understanding, thoughts will still arise. Impressions will still appear quickly. The difference now is not whether they appear. The difference is whether you immediately agree with them. Delay the agreement. A thought appears, and your reaction feels immediate. Fear rises. Anger sharpens. Anxiety tightens your chest. It seems automatic, uncontrollable, inevitable. But there is a subtle distinction most people never notice. The impression is automatic. The agreement is not. When something happens, your mind produces an initial interpretation almost instantly. This is natural. It is fast, instinctive, and often emotional. But what happens next is where your authority begins. Do you accept that interpretation as truth, or do you pause? Most suffering intensifies not because of the first thought, but because of the speed with which you endorse it. This is a disaster. They did this on purpose. I will not recover from this. The mind proposes. You approve. Emotion expands. The Stoics were precise here. An impression arrives. Assent is voluntary. That narrow gap between the two is where discipline is formed. Not dramatic discipline, quiet discipline. The discipline of withholding immediate agreement. Imagine saying internally, "A thought has appeared. Let me examine it." That sentence alone slows the process. It introduces space, and space reduces intensity. When you delay agreement, you weaken the emotional surge. You allow reason to evaluate the thought. Is it accurate? Is it exaggerated? Is it based on assumption rather than fact? Often you will discover that the first interpretation was incomplete or distorted. This does not eliminate emotion instantly. It reduces momentum, and reducing momentum prevents escalation. Fear grows when catastrophic thoughts are endorsed. Anger grows when assumptions about intention are accepted. Anxiety grows when imagined futures are treated as certain. If you interrupt the agreement, you interrupt the growth. This practice requires patience. You will not catch every thought at first, but each time you pause before endorsing, you strengthen the space between stimulus and response. That space is freedom. And as you create distance from automatic agreement, another shift becomes possible. You begin to notice that emotions feel overwhelming, not only because of what you think, but because of how you identify with them. Name the emotion without becoming it. When anxiety appears, you often say, "I am anxious." When anger rises, you think, "I am furious." The language seems harmless, but it fuses identity with emotion. You are no longer experiencing anxiety. You are anxiety. You are no longer feeling anger. You are anger. This fusion intensifies the experience. The Stoics practiced a subtle but powerful form of internal distance. Instead of merging with emotion, they observed it, not as denial, not as suppression, but as distinction. Anxiety is present. Anger is arising. Fear is here. The content remains the same. The relationship changes. That linguistic shift may seem small, but psychologically it is decisive. When you say, "I am anxious," you solidify the state as identity. When you say anxiety is present, you acknowledge it as a temporary experience moving through you. Emotions are waves. Identity is the ocean. When you confuse the wave with the ocean, you feel overwhelmed. When you recognize the wave as movement within a larger field, you gain perspective. This perspective does not eliminate discomfort. It reduces submission. You can feel anger without acting from anger. You can feel fear without obeying fear. You can experience anxiety without constructing your entire perception around it. Language matters because it shapes perception, and perception shapes response. By naming emotion as a passing condition rather than a defining truth, you reclaim mental territory. There is also a biological effect. When you label an emotion accurately, the intensity often decreases. The act of naming engages rational processing. You move from reactive mode into reflective mode. The nervous system begins to calm because the mind has stopped treating the state as a threat. This practice strengthens the observer within you, the part that can witness thought, witness feeling, and still choose action. And once you recognize that you are not the turbulence, but the awareness of it, authority begins to return. From that authority, attention becomes your most powerful instrument. Where you place it determines what grows. And if you keep placing it on imagined threats and replayed grievances, fear and anger expand. But if you redirect it toward what you can actually do now, something shifts. Redirect attention to actionable ground. Attention is authority. Where your attention rests, your emotional energy follows. If it remains fixed on imagined futures, anxiety grows. If it circles around past insults, anger deepens. If it clings to uncertain outcomes, fear tightens its grip. Your mind may not control what thoughts appear, but it does influence where attention stays. Most people believe they are trapped by emotion. In reality, they are trapped by fixation. When something unsettles you, notice where your attention goes. Does it move toward speculation? Toward hypothetical consequences? Toward what someone else might think? Toward everything you cannot currently influence? If so, your energy is invested in unstable ground. The Stoic response is not to deny emotion, but to anchor attention deliberately. Ask a different question. What can I do right now that is within my control? Not tomorrow, not in theory, now. This question shifts you from mental rehearsal to physical action. Even small actions matter. Clarify a task, send a message, organize information, take one constructive step. Action redirects attention from abstract fear to tangible movement. Fear loses intensity when you are engaged in execution. Anxiety weakens when attention is occupied with responsibility. Anger softens when you are focused on constructive response rather than narrative replay. This is not distraction. It is precision. You are not ignoring the situation. You are refusing to let your attention wander into territory where it has no authority. You place it where it can produce effect. There is strength in this discipline. It prevents spirals. It interrupts loops. It grounds the mind in present capability instead of future uncertainty. And as you practice this redirection, you begin to notice something else. Much of your anger is not caused by what others did. It is caused by an expectation you carried about how they should behave. Anger as unmet expectation. Anger often feels justified. It feels like a reaction to injustice, disrespect, incompetence, betrayal. But beneath most anger lies something quieter and more revealing: expectation. You expected someone to act differently. You expected fairness. You expected consideration. You expected consistency. And when reality did not align with that expectation, tension rose. The emotion did not emerge from the event alone. It emerged from the collision between what happened and what you believed should have happened. Expectation is not wrong, but rigid expectation creates vulnerability. The Stoics approached this with sober clarity. Other people act according to their character, their knowledge, their limitations. The world unfolds according to causes beyond your command. If you expect the world to conform to your internal script, frustration becomes inevitable. Notice how anger grows. First, an event. Then the thought, they should not have done that. That single sentence transforms irritation into resentment. It converts disappointment into indignation. It turns difference into offense. But what if instead of insisting that reality align with your preference, you prepared yourself for human imperfection? What if you replaced expectation with understanding? Not approval, understanding. Preparation dissolves much of anger's intensity. If you accept that people will sometimes disappoint you, you are less shocked when they do. If you accept that outcomes will sometimes frustrate you, you are less destabilized when they occur. This does not mean passivity. It means precision in your reaction. You can respond firmly without emotional combustion. You can set boundaries without internal chaos. You can correct behavior without surrendering to rage. Anger is powerful because it feels righteous. But when examined carefully, it is often a signal that your mental demand for control has been violated. And when you release the demand, the intensity reduces. This shift connects directly to anxiety as well, because anxiety, like anger, is often rooted in attachment, not to people's behavior but to outcomes. And when outcomes become personal investments rather than possibilities, the mind tightens its grip. Anxiety as attachment to outcome. Anxiety often feels like fear of what might happen. But look closer. It is rarely about the present moment. It is about the outcome you are attached to. You want success. You want approval. You want certainty. You want things to unfold according to your preferred scenario. And the more tightly you hold that preferred outcome, the more unstable you feel when it is not guaranteed. Anxiety is not just anticipation. It is overinvestment. The Stoics understood this clearly. You are entitled to your effort, not to the result. When you confuse the two, anxiety emerges. You try to control what is not yours. You mentally rehearse every possibility, in an attempt to secure a specific ending, but no amount of rehearsal can grant certainty. The future is not under your command. Your preparation is. When you shift your attachment from outcome to action, anxiety loses structure. Instead of asking, "What if it fails?" you ask, "What is the best action I can take now?" Instead of clinging to the result, you commit to the process. This does not eliminate uncertainty. It reframes your relationship with it. You can desire success without depending on it. You can pursue achievement without staking your emotional stability on it. You can prepare thoroughly without demanding control over what follows. The more you focus on executing your responsibility, the less room anxiety has to expand. Because anxiety feeds on hypothetical futures. Action feeds on present capability. When you accept that outcomes are influenced by factors beyond your control, you stop negotiating with uncertainty. You do your part. You release the rest. And in that release, tension softens. But the ultimate transformation is not simply reducing fear, anger, or anxiety. It is understanding what freedom actually means. Not the absence of emotion, but the refusal to submit to it. The quiet practice of daily internal review. There is one discipline that silently reinforces everything you have learned so far, and almost no one practices it with consistency. It is not dramatic. It does not require special tools. It does not demand hours. Yet it strengthens awareness, refines judgment, and stabilizes emotion over time. It is the daily internal review. At the end of the day, most people distract themselves. They seek noise, stimulation, escape. They move from activity into avoidance. But the Stoics did something different. They paused. They examined. They asked themselves precise questions. Where did I allow a thought to govern me without examination? Where did I react instead of respond? Where did I confuse assumption with fact? Where did I demand control over what was never mine? This review is not self-condemnation. It is calibration. Without review, you repeat patterns unconsciously. With review, you identify them. And once identified, they lose part of their power. Think carefully. Throughout your day, how many thoughts passed without scrutiny? How many minor irritations were amplified internally? How many imagined scenarios consumed attention that could have been placed on action? Without reflection, those moments disappear into memory, but their effect remains embedded in your habits. The practice of review brings them into light. When you examine your day calmly, without emotional exaggeration, you strengthen the observer within you. You reinforce the distinction between impression and assent. You begin to notice patterns in your own cognition. Perhaps anxiety always spikes around uncertainty about approval. Perhaps anger consistently appears when expectations are rigid. Perhaps fear arises whenever outcomes are ambiguous. Once you see the pattern, you are no longer fully captive to it. This practice also builds something deeper, accountability to your own reason. You are not reviewing to impress anyone. There is no audience, no applause, no public record. It is a private alignment between your principles and your behavior. And this alignment produces quiet confidence. When you consistently reflect, your emotional reactions begin to shorten. Not because life becomes easier, but because awareness becomes quicker. You catch the thought earlier. You question the narrative sooner. You release attachment faster. Over time, this creates cumulative stability. Consider the alternative. Without review, emotions seem random. Reactions feel inevitable. Patterns remain invisible. You assume you are simply an anxious person, or an angry person, or a fearful person. Identity becomes fused with habit. Review interrupts that fusion. It reminds you that you are not your reaction. You are the one who can examine it. This practice also prevents arrogance. Even as you grow calmer, you will still make mistakes. You will still endorse thoughts too quickly. You will still feel anger rise sharply. The review does not demand perfection. It demands honesty, and honesty strengthens character. Each evening you refine your perception. You adjust your interpretation. You recommit to focusing on what is within your control. You remind yourself that tomorrow will bring impressions again, and that your authority lies not in preventing them, but in governing your response. This is how emotional freedom becomes sustainable. Not through one powerful insight, but through daily cognitive discipline. Fear may visit, anger may flare, anxiety may whisper. But when you review your day with clarity, you gradually retrain your mind. And in that retraining, you build something no external event can take from you: steady self-governance. Emotional freedom is cognitive discipline. Freedom from fear, anger, and anxiety does not mean those emotions disappear. It means they no longer command you. Emotions will arise. Thoughts will form. Impressions will arrive without invitation. The Stoic does not aim to eliminate this. He aims to master his response to it. Freedom is not silence inside the mind. It is authority within the mind. Cognitive discipline is the ability to question before agreeing, to observe before reacting, to choose before acting. It is the habit of examining impressions rather than obeying them. It is the repeated decision to anchor yourself in what you control and release what you do not. When you practice this consistently, something changes in your identity. You stop seeing yourself as someone at the mercy of emotional storms. You begin to see yourself as the one who notices the storm without becoming it. Fear can be present without dictating avoidance. Anger can appear without determining behavior. Anxiety can arise without paralyzing action. The emotion exists. The submission does not. This is not suppression. Suppression denies the feeling. Discipline acknowledges it and then chooses deliberately. That choice, repeated over time, builds internal sovereignty. Sovereignty is calm strength, not loud, not dramatic, quiet and firm. When you understand that thoughts are not facts, that stories amplify suffering, that control has limits, that agreement is voluntary, that attention is power, that expectation fuels anger, and that attachment intensifies anxiety, you stop fighting shadows. You start managing perception. And when perception is managed, emotion becomes proportionate, no longer exaggerated by imagination, no longer prolonged by repetition, no longer inflated by illusion. Freedom, then, is not emotional emptiness. It is clarity strong enough to hold emotion without collapsing into it. Calm is not silence, it is authority. Nothing outside needed to change. People remain imperfect. The future remains uncertain. Events remain unpredictable. Thoughts will continue to appear. What changed is your relationship to them. You no longer believe every thought. You no longer replay every narrative. You no longer demand control over what was never yours. You observe. You examine. You choose. Fear becomes information. Anger becomes feedback. Anxiety becomes a reminder of attachment. The storm may still pass through, but you are no longer the storm. Calm is not the absence of noise. It is the presence of authority. And when authority returns to your own reason, freedom is not dramatic. It is steady. It is deliberate. It is yours.